President Trump, in several press conferences since the recent war broke out, appealed to China to talk Iran's new leadership into giving up its nuclear ambition. For Iran, hello. Last night, U.S. forces struck Iran's ports and a naval checkpoint in Bandar Kargan. Iran, in response, fired cruise missiles and attacked U.S. vessels with drones and fast boats. Washington claims that last night's attacks shouldn't be seen as a resumption of the war or a termination of the ceasefire. Attacks on Tehran and across Hormuzgan province were also reported. All of this is unfolding at a time when both sides claim they're seeking diplomatic avenues to reach a peace deal. CNN reported from U.S. Central Command that U.S. forces targeted Iranian military facilities responsible for launching a series of unprovoked missile, drone, and small boat attacks against American warships transiting the Strait of Hormuz. What's happening nowadays in terms of diplomacy to find a solution to the problem of the Strait of Hormuz is a clear sign that politics is more concerned with oil markets than putting an end to the terrorist acts of a radical Islamist group ruling Iran. It seems to take priority over freeing people from the atrocities and the brutalities of a regime that doesn't hesitate to kill its own people by the thousands within hours, staging public executing shows by hanging people from cranes, inviting people to watch and cheer, and even parade real missiles through the streets to celebrate how they have intimidated other countries into inactivity when it comes to ending the rule of what, in my view, is the most dangerous terrorist group in history. Let us examine the diplomatic efforts to see if there is any glimpse of hope. The viral debate is whether China could narrow the gap between the US and Iran, and if so, in what sense? Seeing China as the most important peace broker between in a US-Iran war offers Beijing leverage that it has rarely enjoyed. Araghchi, Iran's foreign minister, visited China just days before Donald Trump is expected to meet Xi. This is especially important when we recall that President Trump, in several press conferences since the recent war broke out, appealed to China to talk Iran's new leadership into giving up its nuclear ambition. For Iran, Beijing is its largest oil customer, a diplomatic shield, and a counterweight to Washington. Apart from that, it's widely believed that China has played a major role in advancing Iran's missile program. How is China expected to position itself between Iran and the US? What if Iran gives up its uranium enrichment facilities but receives a solid guarantee from Washington, verified by Beijing, that the Islamic regime could remain in power and wouldn't be subject to future US attacks? If it were so simple, there would be no need for a peace broker, because this is essentially what Washington wants. To understand the complexity of the issue, we should look at the reasons Iran doesn't agree to such a proposal. Iran is not a conventional state. It cannot give up its providing financial and military support to militant groups in the region, cannot stop destabilizing the region, cannot recognize Israel, cannot normalize relationship with Arab countries. Even if Iran could do all of this, which would be impossible, without fundamentally changing the nature of the regime. It still couldn't give up its dictatorship, its totalitarian political system, and the militarization of the country. Iran's foreign policy and its domestic governance are just two sides of the same coin. I could explain these points in detail, but that would take more time than this episode allows. In fact, understanding these realities is essential to truly grasp the situation. As surprising as it may seem, China may ultimately lean toward Washington's side, not out of altruism or a desire to save humanity or to dismantle the monster it may have helped to create, but out of its own strategic interests. However, if China were to do so, it would likely play it smart, maintaining its ties with Iran to benefit from its oil resources, to preserve its strategic foothold in the Middle East, and to continue spreading anti American narratives in the region. Despite superficial analysis suggesting that Beijing would benefit from Washington being backed down in another overseas war, as the war drags on, the economic side effects appears to becoming uncomfortable for China. An unstable oil market would certainly affect its export-reliant economy. Trump halted Project Freedom, a planned U.S. naval operation to escort commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz, less than 24 hours after announcing it. This led to speculation that Washington, after confronting Iranian missile fire directed at its vessels, was reluctant to continue the project and therefore eager to find a diplomatic solution. There were also reports that Saudi Arabia refused to allow US aircraft involved in the mission to operate from its territory or airspace. However, this may not be the main reason. Either Iran's reaction wasn't what Washington expected, or the operation was deliberately brief, intended to test the situation before planning further military steps.
Fierté pour moi d'être à nouveau parmi vous, de retrouver dans ce hangar et d'être à nouveau sur le Charles de Gaulle avec l'ensemble.
It's also worth noting that France and the UK are reportedly planning to take measures to ensure the security of the strait independently of US-Iran negotiations. The aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle has moved through the Suez Canal toward the Red Sea as part of preparation for a potential freedom of navigation mission. Israel, meanwhile, continues its military pressure against Hezbollah in Lebanon. In Iraq, a new government is being formed that's expected to move toward disarming Iran-backed militia groups. At the same time, Israel has begun signaling the possibility of new rounds of military actions against Iran unless Iran agrees to dismantle its enrichment facilities and transfer its enriched uranium abroad, limit its missile program, and stop supporting militia groups in the region. Furthermore, in Washington, some Republicans are advocating for arming the Iranian people.
Trump and I were Israel, I would load the Iranian people up with weapons so they could go to the streets armed and turn the tide of battle inside Iran. We don't need American boots on the ground. We've got millions of boots on the ground in Iran. They just don't have any weapons. Give them the weapons so they can rise up like we did to destroy this regime. A Second Amendment solution, I think, would go a long way to ending this war.
As far as I'm concerned, the Trump administration aims to reach a point where Iran will no longer be able to close the strait. They want the state to be governed by an international body, something that Trump called for from the beginning after its closure. If such a scenario unfolds, Israel could resume its military campaign against Tehran while also supporting armed political movements inside Iran. See you next time.